Hello, I'm Emma Green and welcome to the Virtual Engineering Centre podcast, Engineering in Digital. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the myths of virtual technologies as we're joined by Virtual Engineering Centre specialist and expert Matthew Butcher. We're going to be discussing the common myths and misunderstandings of virtual technologies, including VR, AR and mixed reality. We'll be discussing how these technologies can be adopted by businesses and how they can help your business to overcome typical industry and business challenges. The Oxford Dictionary defined virtual reality as computer-generated simulation of a three-dimensional image or environment that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way by a person using special electronic equipment such as a helmet with a screen inside or gloves with sensors, including haptics. In 2020, the University of Liverpool conducted a survey and report, Blueprint for Digitally Driven Recovery from COVID-19. Of the Northwest businesses who responded to the survey, during the pandemic, 76% of businesses adopted new digital technologies, 79% increased investment in digital technology, and 29% are using simulation, VR or AR. Over 50% of this adoption has already provided a positive impact to their business. If we explore VR spend by sector, consumers hold 53% of the market, distribution and services hold 15.8% of the market, with manufacturers and resources holding 13.8% of the market. So with this growing demand for virtual reality and similar devices, what does this mean for businesses across the Northwest and how we operate in the future? So welcome, Matt, and thank you very much for joining us today. So for our listeners, if you could just offer a quick introduction to yourself and your role within the Virtual Engineering Centre.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. My name is Matthew Butcher. I've worked at the Virtual Engineering Centre for 3 years and I'm a project engineer. I have a background in visualization and specialise in virtual reality, animation and interface design. I've worked on quite a lot of different things since I've been here, from ERDF funded projects like LCR 4.0 to working with large organisations like Sellafield and Bentley Motors.
So Matt, as our expert on all things virtual here at the Virtual Engineering Centre, we're going to pick your brains in demystifying VR and AR technologies. The first myth we are going to look at is their limited uses. So, are virtual technologies limited to supporting businesses only through their product development phases?
No, I mean, VR and AR and simulation is brilliant for the product development phases of a workflow. You know, we've worked with many different sectors which use VR to define products and workspace layouts in the virtual world before spending a lot of money and time in manufacturing physical prototypes. Especially with some of the aerospace and automotive businesses we work with. We recently took part in Project Faith, which was a collaboration with us and CAMLED and the National Nuclear Laboratory. And that did focus on development phases, showing like the different methods for virtual design reviews and the development of digital twins and that sort of thing. But my point is that we also expand our usages of VR beyond product development so that it can be helpful for so many more things. So as an example, we did a project with Sellafield using VR for remote training on a virtual replica of a real world environment and a hazardous environment. And this emulated the real world in both the visuals, the simulation physics and the feedback of the tools themselves. And then as a part of the training modules, we extracted trainee performance data and recordings of the VR sessions. And what that gave them was much more of a practical outcome than paper-based training modules could give, which were used in the past. And it gives a bit more than they could have ever provided. We've also shown it's possible to combine different techniques surrounding factory scanning and simulation to assess existing workflows. So we did a project as part of LCR 4.0 with an SME Gen Lab, and that ended up identifying a way to enhance productivity by 20% just by rearranging some stations in a factory. We did something similar with another SME, Alma Products, and ended up helping them to validate where best to put a new machine in their factory by rearranging their stations. So we used point cloud scanning and captured the environment and then placed the user in VR. And then they could place the machines and test the virtual environment layout. So they're just some of the examples that come to mind, but we've definitely shown in the past how VR and AR can be effectively used for other things like medical-based simulations, visualizing large data sets, patient rehabilitation, capturing real-world environments, and much more. So yeah, beyond product development, technology surrounding VR can be used in a massive amount of ways now, and it's always expanding as well.
It's really interesting what you've said there actually as well, because with regards to remote training and working, especially now since COVID and now more companies and businesses are introducing a more hybrid working model, it kind of supports the next normal, whatever that means to each individual in their companies, with regards to keeping teams safer and even offer just better convenience or home life working split. The example you've given there with regards to Sellafield working in more risky or high risk environments, if the training can be done remotely, obviously it keeps teams safer whilst also being more informative, and allowing Sellafield to collect that data on their training and what maybe works, what maybe doesn't work, what's picked up quickly, what needs a little bit more support around it. And also the factory scanning and looking at machinery. I'm sure a lot of manufacturers have large, heavy equipment, which is way too large to physically move around and test quickly and easily. So it's the fact that you can run a simulation and run hundreds of simulations quickly to find that best solution for your team and production lines to enhance productivity is absolutely fantastic, and it saves a lot of time and money for these businesses.
And doing things that you can't usually do very easily in the real world, but being able to do it virtually is just a big advantage.
That leads us on to our next myth. What would you say to those who believe VR applications and devices, for example, are expensive and perhaps therefore out of reach for smaller business such as SMEs?
Yeah, in the past that probably would have been correct, but the technology in this area has improved a lot in such a short space of time. It's a huge field, and the ways in which you can delve into digital adoption are really broad now. So it's important to make sure you're using the right tools in the right way. We obviously work with businesses not just from the Northwest, but further afield as well. And a large chunk of them are SMEs. And yeah, it's great to offer them access to the facilities and technology we have here. But a lot of these businesses are not being exposed to the latest technology. So that's really good for them. But I think we're always mindful of the off-the-shelf tools, both hardware and software tools, which can best fit whatever business we're working with, really. In our role as VR engineers and technology experts, we need to make sure that we're giving unbiased suggestions to whatever business based on the issues they're trying to address. And even if the VR tools or hardware that is available are not too expensive themselves, we know that a big expense for small businesses could just be the time to spend to learn, to set up and use something different to what they would usually use. If a business is interested in digital adoption, but they find that the technology is too complicated or impractical for them to integrate into what they're using at the moment and their workflows, and if it's going to be a big battle to upskill staff, then ultimately it's just not going to work for them. So to relate back to the original question, those who say that VR is expensive. Practical and useful technology can actually be relatively inexpensive these days, but we're like always mindful that not every business has the time or resources to invest heavily in things that are going to be overly technically complicated. So we always try and be reasonable and unbiased and explore a range of different options which may work best in the long term beyond just the support that we give them initially.
Definitely, and I think like what you've just said there, Matt, is it's about using the right tools in the right way. So you can have a large investment and the digital technology can be really impressive, but if it doesn't actually help the business overcome their own barriers and offer a real solution, then it's probably time to look at an alternative option, whatever that may be. So, for example, we've even had team members develop their own haptic gloves to enhance the experience for users whilst engaging with virtual environments and products. So it kind of goes to show it kind of helps us obviously have that know-how, but also that it doesn't need to be really expensive, really impressive digital tools and technologies. It can be something a small investment, but if it helps and brings that value and solution to the business, then it's definitely worth it.
There are a lot of accessible VR tools that are available that can, they're not going to take up too much space. And if you did buy them, that you're going to always find some way of using it. You could use it one way and then find a completely different way of using it. One way for marketing, one way for training, that sort of thing.
So another common myth with virtual tools is that they are predominantly used within sectors such as automotive.
To be honest, before I joined the VC a few years ago, I wasn't really aware of how many industries can make practical use of technology surrounding, VR and AR and that sort of thing. I have a background in computing, and in my master's degree, I focused on VR, but I only got a small taste back then of how VR can be used practically across industry. But since being here at the VC, I can't really think off the top of my head about what sector we haven't worked with in some way. And most of the time, it makes kind of a really important difference to whoever you're working with. We find as well, it's not just something that they use and then don't use afterwards. So, I mean, I mentioned some other use cases before, which we covered, but even just thinking about the areas of industry we've been involved with in the last few years, we've got the likes of manufacturing. And as mentioned, obviously, a big focus has been on factory planning in the last few years, remote support with VR and AR as well, digital twins. Then you've got the medical sector, so surgical training tools, for example, with VR and mixed reality as well, visualizing real patient data, VR for rehabilitation, that as well, for helping those with stroke or phobia. And then you've got architecture, of course, so, point cloud scanning techniques, 3D CAD. You've got utilities sector, so you've got, planning and visualizing simulations with VR or AR is useful for that as well. Obviously, the energy sector, as I mentioned before, hazardous environment training and simulation for that as well. Virtual prototyping, and then retail is another one as well. So lots of places in retail look for AR product customizers, for example, using AR to customize products and visualize them. Web-based applications, translating like content that's usually only physical, but then into digital content, which can be then accessed from anywhere. Obviously, that's relevant to like the recent pandemic as well, being able to visualize and view things from different locations rather than just in person. An example of that retail sector as well, we had a collaboration with Elderpoint, and they create shipping containers for different use cases, really. So, cafes, or they can transform them into offices. But anyway, we showed them how they could use VR for visualization of those containers to make different design decisions but also show their customers as well what the containers would look like before they had been built. So they show them what they would look like once they've been produced, and that saves them the cost of having real physical showrooms where it's really hard to like portray the different styles of a wall or a container arrangement with like real physical parts. That would be really costly. So showing them using VR that's a really good example of how they could use that. So yeah, I mean, I understand that a lot of the time when people think about VR and AR, they do often still think about the automotive sector and gaming. But we have tons of demos of like how we have supported all different types of businesses, and I'm yet to see an issue or a sector that VR and simulation can't really support in some way. That there's so many ways it can, and often, to be honest, it can be really critical and groundbreaking for a business when they do use it. It's like it's not just a gimmick for them. It can make a big difference in some places.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you've said, the possibilities are absolutely endless. It really is about how far the company wants to go and what the company wants and needs. So, like, for example, we've had several companies come to the VEC, not really know exactly what it is that they want to do, or they can't really identify exactly how visualization tools can be implemented and applied to their own business. But sometimes these case studies and demonstrations can really trigger ideas and help to highlight the multi-purpose uses of these tools and technologies. And then it starts to obviously interest people, and really they see the value that it can bring to their company. So Older Hay Children Hospital are a good example here, where they obviously deal with a lot of different patient data, and they understood that we use data to develop these virtual simulations and products and services and environments. But it was using different data to then create a virtual heart which doctors and surgeons can interact with and walk inside. They can use it for preoperative planning and even training purposes. And then they've also gone to use this technology in developing their own in-house suite, which they can use for, again, teaching and preoperative planning, which is fantastic and really highlights as well that these tools can be used on a long-term basis and can be implemented into permanent processes, not just a one-off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So, to set the scene, you are a manufacturing SME in the Northwest and you have identified the right tools for you and your business. You've decided to go ahead with the investment, but you're still wondering how you could use these tools day to day to get the most out of this investment. And do you have a large enough dedicated space to make this investment worthwhile?
Yeah, so I'll mention some of the sectors and technical use cases before. So another part that's really key in all those examples is looking at that bigger picture and how they can use technology again and again, sometimes in entirely different ways as well than they first anticipated. So once a company has adopted some VR tools, to be honest, lots of the time they find ways they can use it in other ways. Maybe a tool is used for design review and virtual prototype in 1 week, but then the next it's used as part of a business's marketing or presentation of a product. And then maybe another time they'll want to use it to train staff in a more productive and immersive way than you ever could have done before with paper or standard video content. So that's definitely a key point that we try and emphasize here. We try and help to show you how to get the best out of the tools you buy, like what areas to focus on, what the potential is, and ultimately help to get the most out of the investment that the business has made into digital adoption. So VR tools as well themselves are much smaller and much better now, which means you don't really need a very expensive facility with permanent technical setups to get the most out of the technology. Lots of the time, if a company is seeking something even more robust than what the off-the-shelf tools can offer, we will support with access to our facilities as well. if you needed that. So, as for anyone worried about the long-term impacts of tools related to VR, a key thing I think to understand, and a big advantage of it really, is VR simulations can be repeated with no cost, no physical limitation. You don't actually have to be in the space that you're using it in. There's no safety risk, and it can support those recent requirements we've had for remote sandpits a lot easier than physical alternatives ever could. With the whole pandemic and everything as well. So it's a win-win all around, really, when you do start to adopt it. And there's definitely going to be different ways you could get the most out of the investment.
Exactly. And I know you touched on marketing there, and, marketing background myself. I find it really, really interesting how these departments and areas of a business can start to use visualization as well. And you really don't need a massive dedicated space to get the most of these tools. So you've mentioned ElderPoint there, using visualization tools for customization of large spaces and crates. But I know that the VEC also, through the LCR 4.0 project, an ERDF funded project, we supported Open House for developing their products, which they were designing by hand. So it was how to best use visualization tools in the design. And then this can also remove paper design, time and effort from the team members, but also can be used as a communication tool for investors, clients and stakeholders as well.
Open House, I think that's a good example you brought up, because that they wanted to use a customization tool for that product, and show it on a web-based format, on a web app. So that kind of reiterates that point of where it's going and what people want out of the tool. So being able to show it to people regardless of location, regardless of what technology they have, they could show it over the web and in a web-based app, and then show that visualization in 3D through a standard web browser. So yeah, that's a good point.
So where do you see virtual tools such as virtual reality and augmented reality and simulation going in the future?
New headsets and new AR tools and that sort of thing every year. But a big interest for me, to be honest, is how the virtual tools can now draw upon server-side technology and the power of the cloud to deliver VR to an even wider audience. We touched on it before with the use of the internet and the normal standard web browsers, but recent developments from large technology companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, they're proving that it's possible to utilize virtual tools without actually having the physical powerful hardware next to them. I think that's what we'll see. We'll see a much wider embrace of cloud-based integration and streaming across both industry and, to be honest, general consumers in their homes as well. And I think the way we'll achieve that and the way it'll go will be in line with improvements to like internet speeds and the introduction of low latency 5G as well, and generally better server-side infrastructure to enable it. I think the general improvement to the internet will just definitely see a big change for industry, and it'll be much more reliable than before. And then, in turn, this naturally opens the door then for more practical usages of all the technology we talked about, because it allows just a better integration into the existing, business ecosystems that that exist at the moment, and then eventually just leads to greater adoption, I think, across everything. Because lots of the time, the stuff that we're using at the moment, like with the VR headsets, sometimes are not fully integrated into existing workflows, but I can see that being much more common as we draw upon the internet and link it to the cloud and that sort of thing.
I think as well, like you say, there are much bigger corporations like Google and Microsoft bringing visualization tools into their own product and service offerings. But also even like YouTube has a dedicated VR channel with something like 43 million followers or subscribers who can watch shows and documentaries such as nature documentaries filmed in remote locations across the world for educational purposes. And you've got like animals jumping out at you, which is really engaging for learning and children. But also like technology is bringing this to life. It's being more common in our everyday lives. So some of our team, for example, have seen a video on Disney Plus. They have a show called The Mandalorian, their series, where they actually replace the typical green screen in the background with a completely virtual set. And this allows them to like add effects later on. There's less editing. Actors can see what they're in front of, and they can interact and engage more with their surrounding environment, which can even potentially offer like a better performance. There's cheaper travel costs because you're not needing to go to these exotic locations. And I think it just highlights that soon there really will be no sector or industry that will be without these technologies in some way or capacity.
Yeah, I've seen the way they did it. I've seen that video as well. So, it is exciting because that's the perfect example of how technology is just becoming more practical all the time. What they used in that Mandalorian example you just gave was just a screen with footage already behind the actors. And so in the past, lots of that would have been done with a green screen. And then you'd need to do a load of processing and editing to get that right afterwards. But the way they did it there is it just cuts out that green screen and processing steps and allow them to just make things faster and cheaper. And then that added benefit as well that, you don't need to be on an exact location. You get that benefit with the green screen too, but you're just cutting out those middle steps and just making it so you can create things faster and get to a solution faster. And even Disney, that's an example as well. Disney are adopting more hybrid ways of working clearly because that's making the most of what they could do during the pandemic and also moving forward with it too. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's great to see how these technologies are advancing. So, for example, you don't need the green screen. The visualization tools and technology is good enough, and there's not this massive production behind it. So it's just really great to see how more tech is becoming more and more popular and commercial. So, for example, like another film is like Iron Man way back in 2008, where we can see him using these AR glasses to help him on missions. And now at the VEC, we're helping businesses to use this technology every day across their teams for training purposes or machine maintenance. And, it's just really funny how it's gone from these superheroes and really sci-fi to now it's real industry cases. And another one is even EE. So obviously other providers are available. But they have an advert a few months ago where there's a barber shaving a man who's located in the middle of the desert, and it's advertising the power of 5G. So obviously, Mike, you mentioned 5G, which has had some bad press and rumours in the past. So as our experts at the VEC, what are your thoughts on 5G? And should we be worried, for example, of reaching the next level of power and speed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure why some people are still concerned or held back on 5G as such, but I know the people I've spoken to, my friends and stuff like that outside of work, don't really get the great advantages of it, really. It's difficult as well, to be honest. You mentioned EA. It's difficult for these telecoms companies, I think, to really get the message across about how significant it will be, but I think it really is significant. If you're going to be, to be honest, I think, it's going to be one of the most important steps in the next steps in digital adoption. The example you mentioned with EE and the barber shaving someone's face with a haptic arm from a remote location. And I think the main point they're trying to show there is the low latency element of 5G. In the past, if you had a VR AR device streaming live data over a 4G network, then you would often have a delay between an action on one end and then the result on the other because the internet wasn't fast enough and it wasn't low latency. So with VR and things like that, you would end up feeling sick or not having the comfortable experience because there's latency. So with the barber example as well, so if he was using 4G, he might have moved his arm and the robot arm on the other end, which is cutting the person's beard, might have maybe not reacted for a while. There was a bit of a delay, but with 5G, there won't be that delay. It'll be extremely fast and reliable and support lots of data. So not only will, I think, many businesses start to adopt 5G over other ways of getting internet like fiber broadband, because it's just a bit more easier. They also have a much more portable solution. That we'll see people linking smart IoT-enabled devices and drawing upon, as I mentioned before, data from the cloud and that server-based rendering, bringing the power of using the power of the internet to render things out instead of hardware. So yeah, it's going to be very significant. I think lots of people won't need to buy as much hardware, I don't think, because they can pull and stream data from the internet using 5G, similar to how at the moment we stream HD Netflix content and stuff like that at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting to learn more about it and its uses and what it means to businesses. And, it's not just better internet. So just to clarify, as we come to the end, some of the points we've covered and the myths we've helped listeners to overcome. Virtual technologies can be used for so much more than just virtually developing products. They are becoming growingly popular amongst businesses of all sectors and therefore becoming more competitively priced and accessible in cost, although at times can be worth the investment as they can support an array of processes and day-to-day workings over teams. Virtual technologies are there to help your business and can be applied how you want and even at the convenience of being sat at your own desk at home. So very lastly, Matt, to smaller businesses and SMEs who may now be seeing the real possibilities of virtual technologies being in their grasp, what would you recommend the next steps are for those businesses?
Yeah, what I'd recommend, I think it's really easy for an individual to get excited and absorbed by the technology. That's quite a given, because we show a lot of people the technology and people are generally impressed and that sort of thing. But to be honest, as I mentioned, it's about how your business can best use the technology, which should be the top priority, rather than buying the shiny nice bit of kit. I believe that VR and simulation can definitely be used to businesses in some way, and it's just about finding the most practical way. We work with hundreds of SMEs, and it's clear that when they collaborate with us and on the projects as well that we've got, that there's a real value in the facilities we have and the digital test beds that we do, as you mentioned. They get a taste of what the different tools can offer them. And as technical staff, we like to brainstorm and get those ideas start popping up with them. Sometimes those problems are found just through the exposure to the technology that we wouldn't have thought about before. And I'm viewing some of the demonstrations that we show them. So people quickly start to think of things which they've never thought about before. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, we've got a few different teams at Beck, and I think that blend of technical and commercial know-how really, it definitely allows businesses to discuss what their challenges and industry barriers are. I think that's where we're lucky, as we've got people who have worked in the industry for years, and the amount of projects we've done and we do means that we can be ready to assist no matter how crazy the idea is. So I'd say to any SME or business to want to get involved, who may be a bit worried about it and digital adoption and worried about what the next steps for them, definitely get in touch and see what the technology can offer you, because I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least a list of things you could take away which you were not thinking about before you got in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Matthew. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So unfortunately, that is all we have time for on this episode of the podcast, but a huge thanks to all of our listeners for joining us. If you're interested in exploring the opportunities for digital adoption, including those digital tools and technologies we've mentioned today, then please get in touch with the Virtual Engineering Centre via our website or any of the links included in our bio here. Thanks again, and join us next time at the Virtual Engineering Centre podcast, Engineering in Digital.